very, very time consuming. Doesn't mean that it can't be done. It doesn't mean that the results aren't very, very good, because they are, but it's very time consuming.
Why would it be so time consuming if you have like a 4 foot by 4 foot?
Because it needs to be within a few percent. And so you either have to take that softbox back 100 feet, or and I'll talk about their method that they use to compensate, but it's tricky to get it very, very close. And this particular company wants it within a couple percent. You would never even know that it's that far off if you were just taking pictures of even of artwork and trying to reproduce them. You'd have no idea that it was 10% or 4% off, but it is. It's got a wash. Wherever your light is, it's brighter on that side. So unless you have the light right in front of you, then you got even light, but now you're looking at a reflection. So the key thing is that it is time consuming, but it does work. You've got the option of using 2 flash heads. It's much, much easier to get the lighting even. You get very similar results, but you need to get the color of your lights, the balance between the 2 lights, so they're outputting the same exact color. You can actually just take this outside and tape the thing up to your garage door, and I'm not going to even go into that. It can be done. It's fine, but it's not ideal. The thing to keep in mind is you have a lot less control. There's a lot more stuff going on. But if you treat it in a similar fashion that I'm going to talk about when you're doing the flash, it's fine. You can make things work, especially with the smaller targets. Like I said, they're measuring a much smaller physical area, so you don't have as much issue. And they're only measuring a smaller number of colors, so they're not finding things going on over here that are different over here. All right, so the single flash method, this is what the colorized manufacturer recommends. Large softbox. You've got the target, it's away from the wall, and it's on a tripod. You've got your camera behind a black card with a hole cut in it. You've also got a black card blocking yourself, okay? And like I said, this method works. It works great. They're incredibly technical process that they've gone through to come up with some of this stuff. So, so I have tested this. It took me hours to get it perfect. But you don't have any issues with the light being out of balance. And like I said, it works just fine if you understand the concept. You move this card in and out slightly to cause a shadow on the bright side. So you create this shadow that makes it so the shadow starts here and ends there, so that your bright stuff is now the same brightness here as it is there. I'm not going to go into that too much further. You can buy their product if you want to read the whole documentation on how to do this. There's 2 options actually that I found. Some people say, that's totally the wrong way to do it. You got to do it this other way. And I found that both of them work. You point the flashes at the thing they say a 45-degree angle, but I'm just saying at an angle, so you're not bouncing it straight back at yourself. It hits the target. Any reflections bounce away. And then you can make small adjustments, like if this side's a little bit brighter, you just bump this one so it's pointing more towards that side than this side. I think the common method is that you overlap them and that this light is pointed at that side more than it is this side. This method works very well. You don't get any glare. You don't have a lot of light hitting you, especially if you have a nice black wall several feet back here. Thing to keep in mind with all these methods is they're ideally done in like outer space. Okay, the light hits the target. The world that you're in is no longer a variable, because that's a huge part of calibrating your camera. Is we need to understand how this camera responds to color, not how it responds to color in this room, because we want to calibrate this camera so that calibration works in any room. Well, you need to eliminate every variable then from the equation except for the color of light and what that thing sees. So you bounce it off some red. What did you get back? That's the whole idea here. Does that make sense? So if you bounce it off that card and it's near a green wall, you're going to end up with pictures that have a lot of green taken out of them. So that's why I have this wall here. You know, and they say there's a certain distance here, 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever it is. But just keep in mind, if you have black all around everywhere and you have, you know, this thing quite a good distance off the floor, you don't have any light coming in, or you're using flashes that'll kind of make it so that any light in the room already is not even going to show up. That's the idea. I've also had this method recommended, and I've found it also works quite well. The idea here is that this light bleeds off to the side slightly, and this light bleeds off to the side slightly. If I think right, this is a lot like how scanners work. They bounce light, some bleeds onto this. The thing is that you'll also be getting lit yourself, the same amount as this, unless you back up quite a ways and use a telephoto lens. But this works actually quite well, especially in a smaller space. So if you don't have a massive studio that you can block all the light out of, you only have a small room, you can put up some black drop cloths, point the lights at each other, black card with a hole in it. This works quite well. I've also kind of combined the two methods and maybe point one light slightly more at the lamp than the other if it's slightly out of balance. But the idea is that they need to be the same distance from the target so you get even lighting. They need to be the same color, and they need to not bounce off anything but the target and come back into the camera. It needs to disappear into the room. Like I said, think outer space.
Why bother doing all this?
Because your camera perceives color in a certain way, and by going through this procedure and going down this path, you have more control over that. So you can produce a better, more accurate picture and start out with a more accurate starting point. So when you start editing your pictures, they need less work. They're more accurate to begin with. There's a lot of advantages. And you also have the creative control in saying, yeah, that's great, but I'm going to mess up in a certain way that's specific. It's like any other art form. You got to understand it before you can really take control over it, before you can master that subject.
Is this all to build a profile?
Or a camera calibration. And the calibration procedures, some of them, especially the Color Checker Passport, ridiculously simple. You shoot the thing, get it lit correctly, and like I said, this could be light coming in windows here. And this could be your model holding the card. But the idea is they need to hold it out in front of themselves, okay? Get it out from them. And hopefully you don't just have one window. If you do, you need to be taking that into account and getting it so it's right near the shadow, as opposed to just set the thing on a blue table and take a picture of it. It's not going to work so well.
It seems like
You don't. This is overly perfect, but like for the profiles, this is like critical. You get some massive, wild inaccuracies if you don't have it really dialed in.
But if you're using different light modifiers on your strobes, or if at half power is different than full power, and the spectrum changes on your light, then wouldn't that mess everything up?
Yes and no. And I'll go into that later. At this point, we're just talking about you're trying to get this set up for one kind of light. Okay?
So, is it critical then or not that you have these lights be the same as the actual lights you're using to take your...
Ideally, they would be the same. But in practice, really, you can probably just like have two corrections. One, because you've got really different kinds of light. So like outdoor versus indoor. Okay? And like the calibration procedures, what they do is you build one for indoor and one for outdoor. You combine them into one correction for your camera, and then the algorithm inside Adobe Camera Raw or in Lightroom will blend the two for you. So it has a matrix that says, oh, okay, we saw a lot of blue over here and a lot less blue here. And so as we go from one kind of light to the other, when you set your white balance, it picks up on that and goes, oh, okay, we're halfway in between, and it splits the difference. So in reality, and the differences aren't huge unless you're talking about something really wacky, like the lights in like parking garages have some very, very strange spectral curves. But if you're talking about daylight that has a slope like this, daylight that has a slope that's kind of like this, and indoor that's a lot slope like this, they're still relatively smooth. So it's pretty easy to imagine that a curve that kind of came up a little bit but then went up more would be like halfway in between. And it's a fairly linear